Hello, everyone. This is the 62nd episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles, and I'm joined by Paul from Shipley in England. We are pleased to have Mr. Davey Naylor back on our podcast. To remind everyone, Mr. Naylor is the administrator of EnglandStats.com. We continue our interview series with Mr. Naylor as we discuss the matches of the England national team during the 1987-88 season. Hello, Davey. Welcome back. Always a pleasure.
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for having me back.
Last time we left off in the summer of 1987 with England well set to qualify for the 1988 Euros. Bobby Robson's side were a strong side and appear to have built up on the success of the 1986 World Cup and the growing stature of Gary Lineker. This would be a much talked about season that started well but ended in heartbreak, recriminations, and was surely the absolute lowest point of the Bobby Robson era. A lot to discuss for this season. We start off with a friendly on September 9th, 1987 against Euro hosts West Germany at Dusseldorf. For this match, we have the following lineup for England. England wearing a red kit. Peter Shilton in goal. He had just joined Derby County. Viv Anderson, he had just joined Manchester United. Kenny Sansom of Arsenal, he'd replaced by Stuart Pearce of Nottingham Forest in the 77th minute. Tony Adams of Arsenal. Gary Mabbutt of Tottenham. Peter Reid of Everton. John Barnes, he had just joined Liverpool. Glenn Hoddle, he had just joined Monaco in France. He'd replaced by international debutant Neil Webb of Nottingham Forest in the 65th minute. In doing so, Neil Webb became the 1,000th player to represent England. Then we have Chris Waddle of Tottenham. He'd be replaced by Mark Hateley, who also had joined Monaco in France in the 51st minute. Peter Beardsley, who had just joined Liverpool, and Gary Lineker of Barcelona in Spain. Peter Shilton skippered the side as Brian Robson was out injured, along with Terry Butcher, and the Everton pair of Gary Michael Stevens and Trevor Steven were also unavailable for this match. Going to the West German lineup, who were also missing Lothar Matthäus through injury, as well as Thomas Berthold, side managed by Franz Beckenbauer, we have Ike Immel of Stuttgart in goal, Matthias Herget of Bayer Uerdingen, Andreas Brehme of Bayern Munich. He replaced by Stefan Reuter of Nuremberg in the 61st minute, Jürgen Köhler of Köln, Guido Buchwald of Stuttgart, Michael Fronczek of Borussia Mönchengladbach, Pierre Littbarski of Köln, Olaf Thon of Schalke, Hans Dorfner of Bayern Munich, Rudi Feller of AS Roma in Italy, and he replaced by Wolfram Wuttke of Kaiserslautern in the 78th minute, and captain of the side, Klaus Allofs of Olympique Marseille in France. This would be a match where Peter Shilton would be criticized. Germany took the lead in 24th minute through a long-range shot from Pierre Littbarski. Pierre Littbarski doubled the lead in the 33rd minute directly from a corner. And Bobby Robson later stated that at this level, goal from a direct corner was unacceptable. Gary Lineker would pull a goal back in the 42nd minute when Peter Beardsley fed him inside the box. Just before the end, in the 84th minute, Wolfram Wuttke scored West Germany's third goal. Again, it was a long-range shot. Peter Shilton came under some criticism for his display, but it was an early season friendly. I guess the players probably weren't fit at this point. What's your takeaway?
Well, it's interesting that you say that Shilton comes under a lot of flack. I don't think. I mean, yes, it's a 3-1 loss to Germany, to West Germany, which is never great. But I think it's a bit unfair to single out Shilton. The goal, Libarski's goal, second goal, which comes straight from the corner, actually is Viv Anderson. Which, if you watch the footage, it's Viv Anderson that actually impedes Shilton. I can't see that Shilton can be blamed for that goal, and the other two are great shots from outside the area. So yes, okay, you have to look for a scapegoat. I would say that the midfield is missing quite as you said, Robson. Hodge is not would normally be playing. Reed has only just come back from injury, but it's a very, very weak midfield there. And if you watch the footage again, England are all over the place during the first half. Adams and Anderson especially it's wave and wave and wave of attack that the Germans produce, and England are really, really hanging on. They seem to be all at sea. Barnes is quite effective on the left. He managed to cut in a couple of times and test the goalkeeper cover too. And Beardsley, obviously, he sets up Lineker's goal. Waddle doesn't seem to. Waddle doing his hot and cold routine, very much cold in this game. But I would not single out Shilton. I would single out the whole defence. I mean, yeah, you don't want to be conceding from 25 yards twice in a game, and whatever straight from the corner is not ideal. But I wouldn't single out just Shilton. It's a pretty poor display by the entire defence, really, in my opinion.
Not sure that Adams and Mabbutt would have played together before as well. That was a bit of an experimental partnership, I think.
Yeah.
And we should mention also that the West German Bundesliga had started earlier. In fact, the West Germans had played in the friendly just a month before against France. So they were relatively fitter and much more into the season than their English counterparts at this point. So that also may be a reason why they were better on that day.
It's also I guess this friendly was scheduled because it's in Germany. England don't know if they're going to go to Euro 88 just yet, but it's a good test. I mean, they are in pole position with 2 games left. One of which is against the Whipping Boys. So this is a well-arranged, and it gives Bobby Robson an idea of where his team are at compared to one of the favourites and the home team for the next tournament. And as we saw, quite a way away. Having said that, they do get a little bit better this season.
The next game is the penultimate qualifier on October 14th at Wembley against Turkey. We should remind everyone that England had defeated Turkey 8-0 in 1984, 5-0 in 1985. Surprisingly, the first leg of this qualifier in the previous season had ended as a scoreless tie. England were expected to win, and win they did. For this match on October 14th, we have the following lineup. Peter Shilton, Gary Michael Stevens of Everton back in the squad, Kenny Sansom, Terry Butcher of Rangers Glasgow back in the squad, Tony Adams of Arsenal, Trevor Steven of Everton. He replaced by Glenn Hoddle in the 46th minute. Neil Webb, captain of the side, Brian Robson of Manchester United. Peter Beardsley. He replaced by Cyril Regis of Coventry in the 73rd minute. And Gary Lineker and John Barnes. Now, this would be Cyril Regis's 5th and final cap. This was his first cap since 1982. Cyril Regis owes his selection for Coventry winning the FA Cup in 1987. I believe that's why he came back into the limelight just briefly. This would be his final match for England. This was a straightforward 8-0 English win. You have John Barnes scoring in the first and the 28th minute. Gary Lineker had a hat-trick, 8th, 42nd, and 71st minute. Brian Robson in the 59th minute. Peter Beardsley in the 62nd minute. And Neil Webb in the 88th minute. So very easy English win.
Very, very easy. The difference in the golf in class it is quite remarkable. At the end, England are almost walking the ball into the net time and time again. It makes the 0-0 in Turkey even more remarkable. These are 8 of these players, Turkish players, started that game, and they still. I mean, England are out of sight even before the half time, and out of sight after the first half an hour. It's quite a turkey shoot. Sorry for the pun.
Now we come to the final qualifier and the final match of the calendar year. On November 11th, with Yugoslavia hosting England in what would turn out to be as one of England's greatest performances in its football history. For this match at Belgrade, you have the following lineup for England. Peter Shilton in goal, Gary Michael Stevens, Kenny Sansom, Tony Adams, Terry Butcher, Trevor Steven, captain of the side, Brian Robson, and he'd be replaced by Peter Reid in the 76th minute. Neil Webb, he'd be replaced by Glenn Hoddle in the 83rd minute. Peter Beardsley, Gary Lineker, and John Barnes. Going to the Yugoslavia lineup, managed by Ivica Ozim, you have Mauro Ravnic of Rijeka. He'd be replaced by Vladan Radaka of Rad Belgrade in the 46th minute. Zoran Vujovic of Bordeaux in France. Mirsad Baljic of Zaleznikar Sarajevo. Sreko Katanec of Partizan Belgrade. Marko Elsner of Nice in France. He'd be replaced by Milan Jankovic of Real Madrid in Spain in the 29th minute. Faruk Hadzibejic of Sochaux in France. Dragan Stojkovic of Red Star Belgrade. Marko Milnaric of Dinamo Zagreb. Fadil Vokri of Partizan Belgrade. Mehmet Bazdarovic of Sochaux in France. And captain of the side, Zlatko Vujovic of Bordeaux in France. For this match, we should mention a couple of things ahead of this match. Before the match started, the weather was foggy, and the French referee Michel Vautreau had even suggested to the authorities about postponing the match, but the mist was clear just ahead of the match, so the match went ahead. Incidentally, the English singer Cliff Richard had a concert at Belgrade the night before, but the English players were not authorized to attend, though the rest of the party and the journalists did attend.
That's interesting. I didn't know that one. Yeah, that's very funny. It's a very, very wet game. Yeah, the referee. They did think about postponing it for another 24 hours. I'm glad they didn't, because it's one of, as you mentioned, one of England's best performances, even better than the previous game in a way. This is a very, very good Yugoslav side.
Indeed, yes.
And I was about to say, out of sight before half an hour.
Yeah,
they are slightly gifted the first 2 goals, Beardsley scoring after 3 minutes. But you can tell that Yugoslavs absolutely panicked, because the sweeper, Elsner, is being hoiked off the pitch after only 26 minutes. And then they changed the goalkeeper at half time. So they clearly think that there's been some pretty bad performances there. It's quite a breathtaking start to the game. Very, very, very good.
Well, the first goal was a long punt by Shilton, and there was hesitancy between Elsner and Hadzibejic, and Beardsley went through and scored.
Beardsley, I mean, the Elsner, the sweeper, is waiting for the keeper to come out, and Beardsley just comes up behind him and sticks his foot through his legs and knocks the ball into the goal. It's almost comical, really.
So in the 16th minute, John Barnes scored with an indirect free kick.
I didn't know this because this is the days before the back pass rule came in. There was a rule. I'd forgotten about this rule. Is that when you take a goal kick, the ball had to go out of the area, and if you pass it back to the goalkeeper, that was an indirect free kick, and that's what this was. So it was indirect free kick about 15 yards on the left, and Robson just side puts it to Barnes, who just whacks it in the goal. The keeper really has no chance.
Just a few minutes later, in the 20th minute, Steven took a corner from the left side. It was flicked back and headed back in the goal mouth to Robson, who just spinned around and scored. In the 25th minute, there was another corner from the right, this time taken by Barnes, and this was headed in by Adams for his first goal for England.
Yeah, and a classic Adams goal. You know, if you imagine a corner, Terry Adams gets to it first, 1-0 or 4-0 as it was. It's and Adams scores a lot of his goals like that. He's a great new asset to England, a goal scoring centre back. Which yes. I mean, he only scores 5 goals in his career, but I mean, the threat at corners it's a great threat to have. You know, having when the 2 centre backs come up.
The match was effectively wrapped up at this point, and you mentioned about Elsner. He was replaced just a few minutes later by.
They changed the system from a sweeper system. They go back to just a flat 4, and it seems to stabilise things. They don't concede anymore, so at least that works.
Yeah, and we should point out that Elsner was playing as a midfielder for his club, but for the national team, he was playing as libero. Also, in addition to his replacement, the goalkeeper was also replaced at halftime with a debutant, Vladan Radaka. But the match was over effectively anyway at this point.
England only needed a draw to qualify for this, but I think they set their stall out to let's go try and get. Well, it would be 2 points in those days. So, yeah, they certainly were on the front foot. I don't know whether the Yugoslavs thought that England were going to play for the draw. I don't know, but it was a disastrous start. You know.
I imagine they would have, because they were playing at home. Usually they give it all out playing at home.
But before they know it, England are all over them. And in fact, at the end, the Red Star Belgrade Stadium, isn't it? The crowd is very much, they're celebrating England's 4th goal by then, and when actually Yugoslavia actually score from a corner right at 10 minutes to go, they're kind of almost booing their own team really for actually the temerity to score.
The goal by Katanic, I guess with 10 minutes remaining. This is the first goal that England had conceded in all of qualifying.
That's true. They had not conceded. I think they scored 18 goals in their qualifying period, and they were 10 minutes away from not conceding any goal in the entire qualifying thing.
Terry Butcher called this match as one of his most memorable matches ever for England. And also, let's mention that West German manager Franz Beckenbauer was also in the audience to spy on potential rivals England. It's clear that after this match, England are one of the favorites for the Euros. This really changed everyone's complexion about England and their chances after this match.
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't necessarily think that they were the favourites.
They were tipped as one of the favorites, though.
Yeah, one of the. What I can tell you is that, and they wouldn't obviously have known this at the time because this is retrospective rankings. The ELO ratings put England and they are, for those people who don't know what it is, these are it's similar to the official FIFA World Rankings, but it's done in a slightly different algorithm, but. The good thing about it, you can apply this retrospectively. So whoever's done the ELO ratings have gone through every single international football match from the very first one in 1872 and giving a rating. And at this point, England are actually the number 1 side in the world going into. Of course, they wouldn't have known that at the time because they wouldn't have had the FIFA ratings for another 4 or 5 years. FIFA don't come up with a ranking system. But retrospectively speaking, England are the best team. And going into Euro 88, they are unknowingly the best team in the world, unofficially. What more remarkable from their performances, they certainly don't look like one.
Yeah, that's right. This was definitely the high point, and as you say, I think this is what created a lot of the expectations. I think that always seems to be the nature of the press, that Bobby Robson was either the worst manager England could have had or the best, and he had the best team going into it, and this result just really inflated those expectations, I think. And
reading in The Guardian, it very pointedly says Terry Venables must wait at least another year, because there's been a lot of speculation that Venables, and eventually he does become England manager, obviously, but with Graham Taylor sandwiched in between. But there is a lot of speculation around about it this time that Venables is poised to take over from Robson if they were to fail to qualify for Euro '88. So that if they had this game had gone a different way, that it is entirely plausible that Venables might have got the job a lot earlier than he did.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was always there. I think Venables was always a sort of media figure and a press favourite, and he was always sort of waiting in the wings from this time, as you say. And I think we'll see the results for the rest of this season aren't that impressive. And I think this was a great result, but in a way, I think it was maybe a bit of a burden leading up to the Euros.
It certainly painted England in a more flattering light than they were. But having said that, as I mentioned, they were still one of the best sides in the world. And yes, one of the don't forget there are only 8 teams in Euro '88. So, and England do when the draw is made. Is it the best group? I can't remember who the teams were in the other group. Obviously,
Germany, Italy,
Italy.
Denmark, and Spain.
Yeah, So, and England get drawn with Ireland, Netherlands, and the USSR. Is that a good group? I don't know, really. I mean, obviously it's not, because we know what happened. But I think they would see the first game against the Republic of Ireland as a very winnable game, and they do actually have a game with the Dutch prior to this match. We'll get to that in a second, obviously. But yeah, and the USSR. I mean, who knows about them? That they're always an enigma. The Russian teams, they were in those days anyway.
If you remember the league as well around this time, Beardsley and Barnes are just on fire at Liverpool. That's also another reason why perhaps their form is why many tip England to do well.
Yeah.
Great season for Liverpool, this one. And McMahon as well, who comes into the team a little bit soon, in fact. I think comes into the team. It's also having a great season as well.
Next game is his first cap, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
We come to the new year, 1988, and the experimentations and the friendlies ahead of the Euros. For the first match of the year on February 17th, 1988, England traveled to Israel at Tel Aviv to face Israel. For this match, England wearing red kits. You have the following lineup. Starting in goal, Chris Wood of Rangers Glasgow, Gary Stevens, Stuart Pearce, Dave Watson of Everton, Mark Wright of Derby County. He'll be replaced by Terry Fenwick of Tottenham in the 74th minute. This was Fenwick's first cap since playing against Argentina in the 1986 World Cup. And this would also turn out to be his 20th and final cap for England. And his first cap had been in 1984. Then you have Neil Webb, international debutant Steve McMahon of Liverpool, Chris Waddle of Tottenham, John Barnes, Peter Beardsley captaining the side. We have to mention that Brian Robson was injured like 2 days before this match. Playing for the last time for England, Clive Allen of Tottenham. This was his 5th and final cap for England. His first cap was in 1984. And he was replaced by international debutant Mick Harford of Luton Town in the 67th minute. This would end up as a scoreless tie. As you can see, this is not standard lineup for England. A lot of players missing. Apart from Robson, we're missing Shilton, Trevor Steven, Tony Adams, and Terry Butcher, among others, and a couple of debutants. So there was an experimentation feel to this match. As far as Clive Allen, he's a prolific scorer at club level, but I guess he was unlucky to have been, a contemporary of Gary Lineker. That may have limited his opportunities.
I don't know what to say about Clive Allen. Yeah, I always remember him in a Tottenham shirt, just being really, really, really good. But I guess he's one of those players that never made it to. I mean, this is his fifth and final cap. And as you said, I mean, it was very sporadic international career that he had. I guess he just didn't fit the bill, really, or he certainly didn't. Yeah, he was unfortunate to come up against people like Beardsley and Lineker, who got into the team before him, but he never really made it at international level. We're missing Kenny Sampson. We're missing, who else are we missing? We're missing Butcher, Robson, of course, and the old guard like Peter Reid and those guards are Hodge aren't in this team, and then it's a pretty drab affair, really. I don't know what Bobby Robson gets out of this game, really, other than maybe a suntan. I don't know, really. To be honest, it's not a great game. Interestingly, I would like on a side note, I would like to say this is one of the few first games that I got from your website, Soccernostalgia. You've annotated this match quite in depth on your website. So you're quoted as one of my sources on my website.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Right, you chose a particularly boring match as one of the ones that you've gone in depth on.
We come to the next friendly on March 23rd at Wembley, and as you mentioned, against the Netherlands, that was already in their group in the Euros. We have to mention, and obviously we know how this ends. Holland will win the Euros and all that. But this is around the time where there's a renaissance of Dutch football, and Ruud Gullit has just won the Ballon d'Or, and he's just on fire in Italy with AC Milan. And
they just also won the European Cup as well that year, or the
PSV Eindhoven would win at the end of the season. So
I do remember AC Milan being, led by Gullit, being absolutely awesome at this time.
Yeah. But even though this outcome for this match is different, there are a lot of indications of the problems that the English would have to face in the Euros. So let's go through the England lineup for this match on March 23rd at Wembley. You have Peter Shilton in goal, Gary Michael Stevens, Kenny Sansom, Tony Adams, Dave Watson, and he replaced by Mark Wright in the 72nd minute. Trevor Steven, Neil Webb, he'd replaced by Glenn Hoddle in the 69th minute. Captain of the side, Brian Robson, John Barnes, Peter Beardsley, he'd replaced by Mark Haitley in the 35th minute, and Gary Lineker. Now let's go through the Dutch lineup managed by Rinus Michels. And we have to mention that Marco van Basten was out through a lengthy injury around this time. He'd only be back towards the end of the season. Nevertheless, you have a good, strong Dutch lineup. So you have Hans van Breukelen of PSV Eindhoven in goal, Barry van Aer of PSV Eindhoven, Siak Troost of Feyenoord, Ronald Koeman of PSV Eindhoven, Sani Siloy of Matra Racing Paris in France, Jan Wouters of Ajax, captain of the side Ruud Gullit of AC Milan in Italy. He'd be replaced by Henry Kruisen of Den Bosch in the 60th minute, Arnold Muren of Ajax, former Ipswich and Manchester United midfielder. Gerald Vandenberg of PSV Eindhoven. John Van Schip of Ajax, and he'd be replaced by Adik Kut of PSV Eindhoven in the 83rd minute, and Johnny Bozeman of Ajax. For this match, England would take the lead in the 13th minute through Gary Lineker. The Dutch would tie the match when Tony Adams diverted Jan Wouters' cross into his own net in the 20th minute. 5 minutes later, the Dutch would take the lead through Bozeman. I believe in this sequence, just about most of the Dutch team passed to each other without the English players touching it before Bozeman headed in the goal. The Dutch were more or less in control for this match and looked better for most of the match. But England tied the match in the 61st minute when Adams scored the equalizer in the 61st minute. Again, another header. This ended as a tie, but the Dutch came out looking better from this match. And I remember reading the press after this match. They were very complimentary of the Dutch and how they performed at Wembley. There was a lot of reporting in the sense that England better watch out in the Euros because on balance, the Dutch seemed much better in this match.
Absolutely, yes. It was a bit of a wake-up call so they could see what they were up against a couple of months later. England got out of jail in this game. The only instance, by the way, of England players scoring an own goal and scoring an England goal in the same match. Adams is the only person ever to do that.
Oh, this is the only time that's happened?
It's the only time that's ever happened.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
But the Dutch team are not full strength either. They are missing, as you said, Van Basten. They're missing quite a few players.
They're missing Rijkaard.
A couple of months later.
Yeah.
So this is a bit of a shock. But again, still England are still rated as the best team in the world. The Dutch are sixth. So on paper, at least, England should be. You would put England down as favourites. But I think by the end of the match, I think their stock had plummeted somewhat, and their co-favourites for the Euros might have taken a bit of a dent, I think.
Yes. Paul, what were your impressions after this match? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think as we've said, the Dutch were clearly the better team. It was kind of a battling draw for England in this game. And I think that maybe one of the worrying things from England's point of view, as we've said, the Dutch weren't at full strength, and obviously Rijkaard and Van Basten to come back in. And this is just about Bobby Robson's first choice team at this time. Maybe Butcher would be the only replacement in this team if he had everyone available. Based on his selections this season, this looks like it's the team that he's going to go into the Euros with. So it gives a suggestion that they're not quite as strong as certainly the Dutch and maybe as the Yugoslavia result suggested.
We come to the following month. You have another friendly on April 27th at Hungary, at Budapest. So for this match, we have the following lineup. Chris Wood in goal. Viv Anderson of Manchester United. Stuart Pearce. He replaced by Gary Stevens in the second half. Tony Adams, making his international debut as a second division player, Gary Pallister of Middlesbrough. Captain of the side, Brian Robson. Steve McMahon, Trevor Steven, Chris Waddle. He replaced by Glenn Hoddle in the 64th minute. Peter Beardsley. He replaced by Mark Haitley in the 64th minute. Gary Lineker. He replaced by Tony Cuddy of West Ham United in the 83rd minute. Going through the Hungarian lineup managed by László Balint, you have Joseph Gendre of Malaga in Spain, Istvan Kozma of Újpest, Tibor Balog of Vasas, Attila Pinter of Ferencváros, Antal Roth of Feyenoord in Holland. He'd be replaced by Istvan Varga of MTK in the 63rd minute. Captain of the side, Imre Garaba of Stade Rennais in France. Joseph Fitos of Honved. Lajos Detari of Eintracht Frankfurt in West Germany. Joseph Kiprich of Tatabánya. He'd be replaced by Kalman Kovacs of Honved in the 83rd minute. Istvan Vincs of Tatabánya and Janos Shash of Honved. Again, another, like I said, drab affair, a scoreless tie. The only takeaway is, I guess, the debut of Gary Pallister, which as a second division player was very significant.
Indeed, yeah. Again, Robson learns very little in the lead up to the Euros. And this is another relatively full strength team. Maybe Chilton has been replaced by Chris Woods. You could say probably Viv Anderson and Gary Stevens could swap out on that, and Stuart Pearce probably, but I believe he does put on Gary Stevens for Stuart Pearce at half time. Gary Pallister, obviously, Butcher's I think still out, so he's looking at other new players, which is he has the right to do, which is absolutely fine. But other than that, I don't think he has learned anything. So that's 2 away trips and 1 home trip. But the only thing he's learned is his team is not as good as Netherlands in these 3 games.
We come to the tail end of the season. We have the Stanley Rouse Cup. The Stanley Rouse Cup was to include a South American guest. Last year, the 87, it was Brazil. For 1988, it will be Colombia of Carlos Valderrama, among others. First, on May 21st, England face off against Scotland. For this match on May 21st at Wembley, we have Peter Shilton in goal, Gary Stevens, Kenny Sansom, Dave Watson, Tony Adams, Neil Webb. Captain of the side, Brian Robson, Trevor Stephen. He'd be replaced by Chris Waddle in the 72nd minute, Peter Beardsley, Gary Lineker, and John Barnes. And going to the Scotland lineup, you have Jim Leighton of Aberdeen, Richard Gough of Rangers Glasgow, Steve Nicol of Liverpool, Alex McLeish of Aberdeen, Willie Miller of Aberdeen, captain of the side, Roy Aitken of Celtic Glasgow, Neil Simpson of Aberdeen, he replaced by Tommy Burns of Celtic in the 74th minute, Paul McStay of Celtic, Ali McCoist of Rangers, he replaced by Kevin Gallagher of Dundee United in the 77th minute, Murdo McLeod of Borussia Dortmund in West Germany, and Mo Johnson of Nantes in France, side managed by Andy Roxburgh. England would win this match with a goal by Peter Beardsley in the 12th minute. In fact, England dominated and probably should have won with more goals. Yeah. England continued to attack in the second half, but Leighton had a good day in goal and saved Scotland time and time again.
Just for those listeners who are wondering what the Stanley Rouse Cup is, if they've can't remember from our previous podcast. So at the end of 1984, when the home championship fizzled out, for various reasons, too complicated to go in here, the only fixture really which the FA and what they were interested in keeping was the England-Scotland game, and obviously the rivalry going back for centuries. And it was the only one that actually would sell out both in Scotland and in England. So they wanted to keep that going. So they invented the Rouse Cup. Now, initially in 85 and 86, it was just England playing Scotland. But then they tried to get a bit inventive, and as you said, they started inviting a South American opposition. First of all, it was Brazil. This year, it would be Colombia, and then finally they'd invite Chile in 1989. But after that, it wasn't really working, so they abandoned it. So the centuries old. This is the penultimate yearly contest between England and Scotland. They'd only do it once more. They played every year, barring World Wars, since 1872, so it was a long run of matches, and Scotland were very dominated by England in this game. England, as you said, ran out comfortable winners, and it really should have been a lot more than just the one goal winner, to be honest.
At the end, Scotland manager Roxburgh declared that Beardsley comes from God. No coach has produced him. Again, we have to again mention what a great season Beardsley was having this year with Liverpool. Next we come May 24th, the match against Colombia in this Rouse Cup, again at Wembley. For this match, we have the following lineup: Peter Shilton, Viv Anderson, Tony Adams, Kenny Sansom, Mark Wright, Steve McMahon, captain of the side Brian Robson, Chris Waddle. He'd replaced by Glenn Hoddle in the 74th minute. John Barnes, Peter Beardsley. He'd replaced by Mark Haitley in the 74th minute. And Gary Lineker. And quickly going through the Colombia lineup managed by Francisco Pacho Maturana, we have Rene Higuita of Atlético Nacional Medellín, Luis Herrera of Atlético Nacional Medellín, Andres Escobar of Atlético Nacional Medellín, Luis Pereira of Atlético Nacional Medellín, Carlos Hoyos of Deportivo Cali, Alexis Garcia of Atlético Nacional Medellín, captain of the side Carlos Valderrama of Deportivo Cali, Bernardo Redin of Deportivo Cali, Leonel Alvarez of Atlético Nacional Medellín, Jaime Arango of Atlético Nacional Medellín. He replaced by John Trelez of Atlético Nacional Medellín in the 58th minute, Arnoldo Iguaran of Los Millonarios, and he replaced by Alex Didi Valderrama of Atlético Nacional Medellín in the 78th minute. So for this match, England would took the lead in the 22nd minute through Gary Lineker, and Colombia would tie the match in the 66th minute by Andres Escobar, who would tragically be killed during the 1994 World Cup.
Yes, we all remember. There's a few names in this that any Englishman or any world player of any what am I trying to say? Anyone of my age would recognise Valderrama, Higuita, him of the Scorpion Kick. Although it wasn't this match, it would be a couple of years later in '95 he would do that. And the tragic Escobar, who would end up getting shot for scoring an own goal, which is very, very sad. But this is a game. Dependable Gary Lineker scores yet again, but then in the second half, it England kind of like fizzle out a little bit, and Colombia are able to get the equaliser. Really, again, through all of these build-up games, Robson, I don't know what he's learning. Really, I can't figure out what he's learned in any of these games, really, other than
Lineker can score. That's
negative things, really. Yeah. So the preparation has not gone very well, I would say.
Colombia were a very good team. The attendance was right down on the Scotland game. It was, I think, about 25,000 for this one. So there just wasn't really interest in this tournament beyond the England-Scotland game. So I think, as we said, there was one more year of it, but it never really captured the public imagination. And as Davey said, it wasn't really very productive for Bobby Robson either in terms of shaping his squad.
And he's not really, if you look at the squad again, I mean, he's continuously, I mean, they're very similar teams. He doesn't change them that much. There are odd players here and there. He's not experimenting, particularly as we did in previous podcasts, where in going ahead in previous tournaments, he experimented all the time. There's lots of experimentation here. He's settled on the team with a couple of interchangeable people, but again, they're not really performing for him. So he knows that they're a good team because I mean, some of these names are one of the best players that England have produced, but for some reason they're not gelling together during this season, and they continue not to do that into the tournament.
And there's not that many striking options either beyond Beardsley and Lineker, and he's not really looking at other players, which seems a bit strange because an injury to either of those two would have really scuppered them for the Euros. Yeah,
and he's continually in my opinion, one of the best players that England has ever produced, Glenn Hoddle. He continues to keep him on the sub bench. He doesn't start him. He's done this now in a couple of the games. He always comes on in the second half. I mean, yes, okay, Hoddle is 30 now, and at the end of his career, obviously his career actually ends at the Euros, but still, I don't necessarily think that he's an impact sub that that Bobby Robson clearly sees him as. So, and actually, he starts it in the Euro. So again, I don't know what he's learning here by having Hoddle come on as a sub for the last few minutes and to work his magic. So it's a bit muddled thinking in looking at it retrospectively. There obviously must have been a plan, but looking back at all these years later, it just seems a bit muddled.
A couple of points to mention from this match. This match against Colombia was Viv Anderson's final match for England. His 30th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1978. Also, this tie match with Colombia, England were able to win the Rouse Cup for 1988. Also, this was England's first match against Colombia since 1970 and the necklace affair.
Bogota bracelet, yes.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
We have one more friendly before the Euros. Again, just a few days later, on May 28th, England traveled to Switzerland at Lausanne to face the host nation, Switzerland. For this match, we have Peter Shilton in goal. He replaced by Chris Woods in the 46th minute. Gary Stevens, Mark Wright, Kenny Sansom, Tony Adams. He replaced by Dave Watson in the 46th minute. Trevor Steven, he replaced by Chris Waddle in the 46th minute. Captain of the side, Brian Robson, he replaced by Peter Reid in the 80th minute. This was Peter Reid's final cap for England, his 13th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1985. Neil Webb, John Barnes, Peter Beardsley, and Gary Lineker. And quickly going to the Switzerland lineup managed by Daniel Jean Dupeux, we have Joël Corminboeuf of Neuchâtel Xamax, Alan Geiger of Neuchâtel Xamax, Thomas Schuppert of Aure, Marco Schallibaum of Servette, Martin Weber of Young Boys Bern, Philippe Perret of Neuchâtel Xamax. He replaced by Martin Andermatt of Grasshopper Zurich in the 46th minute. Captain of the side, Heinz Hermann of Neuchâtel Xamax. Beat Suter of Neuchâtel Xamax. Hans-Peter Zwicker of St. Gallen. Thomas Bickel of FC Zurich. He replaced by Patrice Motiez of Neuchâtel Xamax in the 82nd minute. Christophe Bonvin of Sion, and he replaced by Kubilay Turkilmaz of Bellinzona in the 67th minute. England would win this match 1-0 through Gary Lineker goal.
Again, same story really. I mean, the dependable Lineker scores the only goal. This has happened. It's not the first time we've seen this. Lineker scoring the only goal that England score in a game. They didn't concede again, so it's they've had reasonably good clean sheets. You know that they conceded against Colombia and the Dutch, but they're relatively solid, but again, it's another lackluster performance. It's another, they should be out of sight, really. Switzerland are not a great side. They're, this is a good test for them in terms of, have they had good tests against Colombia, they had good tests against Scotland and against the Dutch. This one should be, let's see how many goals we can get, or at least let's see how better we are than Switzerland. And they should be better than a 1-0, to be honest, at this stage of where they are, where the two teams are. So it's, again, another disappointing performance leading up to Euro 88. And my abiding memory of Bobby Robson is all the grief that he got from the press. And he got a lot of grief. They were even more so than Taylor, I would suggest. And you can see why, in a way, that his team can do brilliant things like beat Yugoslavia 4-1 in Yugoslavia and then go on a run of such boring, drab and uninspiring matches leading up to a big tournament. And any Englishman would have thought, right, well, we could do well in the Euros, but there's certainly no form going into it, no form whatsoever. If it wasn't for Lineker, who knows where England would have been if we hadn't had someone who could just pop up and score a goal, like he used to. It's difficult to see where England were going, and it must have been quite a bleak. I don't really particularly remember this game as much, but I certainly remember going into Euros. I would have been 15 at the time. Certainly, I remember going into that Euros thinking this is going to be quite tough. That was my feeling that I remember from back then. And so it proved.
Let's go through the final 20 players for the 1988 Euros, selected by Bobby Robson. At number 1, you have Peter Shilton of Derby County. Number 2, Gary Michael Stevens of Everton. Number 3, Kenny Sansom of Arsenal. Number 4, Neil Webb of Nottingham Forest. Number 5, Dave Watson of Everton. Number 6, Tony Adams of Arsenal. Number 7, Brian Robson of Manchester United. Number 8, Trevor Steven of Everton. Number 9, Peter Beardsley of Liverpool. Number 10, Gary Lineker of Barcelona in Spain. Number 11, John Barnes of Liverpool. Number 12, Chris Waddle of Tottenham. Number 13, Chris Woods of Rangers Glasgow. Number 14, Viv Anderson of Manchester United. Number 15, Steve McMahon of Liverpool. Number 16, Peter Reid of Everton. Number 17, Glenn Hoddle of Monaco in France. Number 18, Mark Haitley of Monaco in France. Number 19, Mark Wright of Derby County. And number 20, surprise selection, Tony Dorigo of Chelsea, uncapped at this point. And I presume this maybe is a replacement for Stuart Pearce, who may have been injured.
It is, yeah, possibly. It is a surprise inclusion. I think also Peter Reid is also a surprise in conclusion because he doesn't actually play in the tournament. So yeah, there's a few. I guess that's Robson's problem here, isn't it? He doesn't have any. He's got some great starting players, but he's picking an uncapped player. That would be you would never do that these days, would you? Pick an uncapped player to go into a tournament. I mean, I know it used to happen quite a bit, but I don't think you'd see Gareth Southgate picking an uncapped player and not at least giving him a run out in a friendly beforehand.
I guess he seems to have a settled squad, but like you said, not many alternatives, it seems like. But he has his mind set up on what his starting lineup is going to be.
He's got a good starting lineup, but not a very good squad. Yeah. So if anything happens to any of his star players, then there's a bit of trouble here.
So we come to the Euros, and England, we mentioned, are in a group with Republic of Ireland, the Netherlands, and the Soviet Union. Ahead of the tournament, the match against the Republic of Ireland is looked upon as the one match where England potentially can get an easy win to get the Euros on track. They're clearly favored against Republic of Ireland, who, let's remember, this is their first finals of any kind that they've qualified. The Republic of Ireland managed by Englishman Jackie Charlton. For this match on June 12th at Stuttgart, we have the following lineup: Peter Shilton, Gary Michael Stevens, Mark Wright, Tony Adams, Kenny Sansom, Neil Webb, he'd be replaced by Glenn Hoddle in the 60th minute, Chris Waddle, captain of the side Brian Robson, John Barnes, Gary Lineker, Peter Beardsley, and he replaced by Mark Haitley in the 82nd minute. Going through the Republic of Ireland lineup managed by Jackie Charlton, we have Paddy Bonner of Celtic, Chris Morris of Celtic, Mick McCarthy of Celtic, Kevin Moran of Manchester United, Chris Hughton of Tottenham, Ray Houghton of Liverpool, Paul McGrath of Manchester United, Ronnie Whelan of Liverpool, Tony Galvin of Sheffield Wednesday. He'd be replaced by Kevin Sheedy of Everton in the 76th minute. Captain of the side, Frank Stapleton of Derby County. He'd be replaced by Niall Quinn of Arsenal in the 63rd minute, and John Aldridge of Liverpool. And we all know about this match. Ireland would score in the 6th minute through a Ray Houghton header and would hold on to inflict an upset win over England.
There's some household names in that Irish team, isn't there?
Yes.
That we all know. I mean, they all, most of them played in the first division at the time, so everybody knew it was. And managed by Jack Charlton, it's an incredible match, really. The build up to it, I remember distinctly being because it was England versus Ireland, and it was like, you know, two close teams that, you know, they all knew each other. Against our nearest neighbours, all the players were played in the same league, most of them, and the build up to it was quite remarkable. And it didn't go England's way. Ireland were terrific, must be said. Ray Houghton's goal, his header, that is etched on my mind, that game. And almost in a way, I was very admired the way that Jackie Charlton had built up that team, and wished that he'd come and manage England, you know, or at least, you know, bring some of his players with him, because he had them. I mean, he brought them up from nothing, really. I mean, Jackie Charlton is revered as a god in most. I think this is right in saying most people would have on their mantelpiece in Ireland two pictures on their mantelpiece, one of the Pope and the other one was Jackie Charlton. He was amazing manager, club manager as well, because he managed Newcastle, I seem to remember as well. He brought I believe he brought the young Paul Gascoigne into the squad when he was a Newcastle manager. I might be wrong about that, but yeah, he was wonderful, and the Irish had. They went at it. They went at England, and they never let them get into their attacking game at all. And I must admit that England were slightly off their game, but then we'd seen that over the previous games, and Lineker was unlucky a couple of times. But it ended up being a very frustrating day for him in the end. And Ireland were due winners, and they deserved it.
If you fall behind against this Irish side, scoring against them is always going to be difficult.
Yeah, I think that was the key, conceding so early in this game, and I think also it was always going to be a really tough game. I don't think England, and I don't believe they would have underestimated this Ireland team. Everyone had seen how strong they were, how well organised Jack Charlton had got them, and that they had really good players. You know, Whelan, McGrath, Houghton, Stapleton are all, you know, top quality players. And England just struggled. They had a few chances, but, you know, the really tough team to play against. And it was always going to be more like a first division type of match. It wasn't going to be free flowing technical football. And yeah, it was just a really bad result for England with what they knew was coming up as well. And as we said, the sort of extremes of the press, even though I think this was always going to be a really tough game, it was a bit of an overreaction, I think, and a lot of pressure straight away, as always tends to happen in the big tournaments, especially on Bobby Robson and the team. And obviously they never recovered from this.
If you remember 1986 World Cup, it started the same way. They lost to Portugal and they were able to build from that. But in the 88 Euros, they were on the back foot from beginning, and it just got worse and worse from there.
Yeah. England, I mean, the last tournament aside, England have never really had a great record in the Euro. I mean, their best, obviously, since until last year, their best showing was obviously '96 on home soil, where they had the advantage not only playing at Wembley for all the games, but they had a favourable draw all the way to at least the semi-final. But they certainly, compared to the World Cup, they've always done a lot better in that tournament than they ever have in the Euros. And this was the nadir of the Euros, losing every single game. That's never happened before, and not since.
We come to the next match 3 days later on June 15th at Dusseldorf against the Netherlands, whom they had played back just 3 months earlier. For this match, we have Peter Shilton, Gary Michael Stevens, Tony Adams, Mark Wright, Kenny Sansom, Trevor Steven. He'd be replaced by Chris Waddle in the 69th minute. Captain of the side, Brian Robson. Glenn Huddle starting this time. John Barnes, Gary Lineker, Peter Beardsley, and he'd be replaced by Mark Haitley in the 74th minute. Going through the Dutch lineup managed by Rinus Michels, we have Hans van Breukelen of PSV Eindhoven, Barry Van Aerle of PSV Eindhoven, Frank Rijkaard of Real Zaragoza in Spain, Ronald Koeman of PSV Eindhoven, Adrie van Tichelen of Anderlecht in Belgium, Jan Wouters of Ajax, captain of the side Ruud Gullit of AC Milan in Italy, Arnold Muren of Ajax, Erwin Koeman of Mechelen in Belgium, Gerald Vandenberg of PSV Eindhoven. He'll be replaced by Wim Kieft of PSV Eindhoven in the 62nd minute. Marco van Basten of AC Milan in Italy, and he will be replaced by Wilbert Souverain of Roda JC Kerkrade in 87th minute. And of course, this is the match where Marco van Basten, if anyone didn't know who he was at this point, after this match, the entire world knew. He would score a hat-trick in this match and eliminate England in the process. He scored first in the 44th minute, a very beautiful goal with Gullit crossing in the box from the left side, and Van Basten controlling it, turning around and shooting past Shilton. England would tie the match in the 54th minute through Brian Robson and had a momentum for some time. But the Dutch would kill off the match in a 5-minute spell. From outside the box on the right side, Wouters volleyed the shot across to the left, and Van Basten stopped and shot past Shilton. That was the second one. And a few minutes later, there was a corner from the right side by Erwin Koeman, and it was flicked back by Kieft, and Van Basten volleyed it from close range. England were out after 2 matches, and the world had a new star in Marco van Basten.
And ironically, this is England played better in this match than they had in any of the previous 4 or 5 games. They were well in this game. I remember Lineker and Robson both hitting the post in the first half. Then just before half-time, Van Basten, they go 1-0 up, and then but again England come back in the second half, and Robson scores a typical Robson. Let's put my safety out of the way, and I just want to score a goal. Typical Brian Robson goal in the second half. But then, as you said, within a 5-minute spell, Van Basten had taken the game away from England. and they never got back into it. Incidentally, it's not even his best goal of the tournament, which is to come up against, I believe, the Russians. Where he scores from almost the corner flag, which is the most remarkable goal I think I've ever seen. But there's also some interesting. This was Peter Shilton's 100th cap. He would go on to set an English record of 125. But so he's still got a long way to go. He's still got another couple of years to go. And that Van Basten hat trick is the first one that England have conceded since 1959.
Oh wow! Who would it have been against? I'm trying to remember. In 1959.
Oh gosh, that's a. I haven't actually.
We'll have to check your website. Yeah,
I'll have to check my own website to look that one up. I'll get back to you before the end of the podcast.
It was already a disaster with one match to go. By this time, against the Soviet Union, they were completely demoralized for this match on June 18th at Frankfurt. For this match, that was completely inconsequential for England. Chris Wood started in goal. Then you have Gary Michael Stevens, Kenny Sansom, Tony Adams, Dave Watson, Glenn Hoddle, captaining the side Brian Robson, Steve McMahon. He'd be replaced by Neil Webb in the 53rd minute, Trevor Steven, John Barnes, Gary Lineker, and he'd be replaced by Mark Haitley in the 64th minute. Going to the Soviet lineup managed by Valery Lobanovsky, you have captain of the side Rinat Dasayev of Spartak Moscow in goal, Vladimir Bessonov of Dynamo Kiev, Vajiz Kidyatulin of Spartak Moscow, Oleg Kuznetsov of Dynamo Kiev, Vasily Rats of Dynamo Kiev, Sergei Aleinikov of Dynamo Minsk, Gennady Litovchenko of Dynamo Kiev, Alexander Zavarov of Dynamo Kiev. He replaced by Sergei Gotsmanov of Dynamo Minsk in the 86th minute, Igor Balanov of Dynamo Kiev. He replaced by Viktor Pasulko of Spartak Moscow in the 46th minute, Alexei Mikhailichenko of Dynamo Kiev, and Oleg Protasov of Dynamo Kiev. The Soviets would take the lead in the 3rd minute when Aleinikov intercepted the ball and just advanced forward and scored. Tony Adams would tie the match again with a header. Glenn Hoddle took a free kick on the right side and Tony Adams headed it in. The Soviets would take the lead in the first half in the 28th minute. Mikhailichenko would score the 2nd goal, and they would score the 3rd goal in the 72nd minute. And again, England, they didn't give much of a fight in this match. They were already defeated and ended the Euros in a disastrous fashion. We have to mention that this was the final cap for Kenny Sansom. This was his 86th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1979. This was the last cap for Glenn Hoddle, his 53rd and final. And his first cap had been in 1979. And also the final cap of Dave Watson. This was his 12th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1984. Disaster all around for England.
A disaster all around. It starts off only 2 minutes into the game, and Hoddle is dribbling the ball out in his own half, and he's just pickpocketed by the Soviets, and they just go up the other end and score. It's quite an easy goal, really, and it doesn't get much better. Okay, Adams, another one of his trademark headers from a corner, from a free kick, I believe it is. But then, once the Soviets have the lead, they don't look back. The second half is, England are trying, but the spirit's kind of gone. I mean, it's a dead rubber in a sense. But this is a very, very good Soviet team. They're a very, very good side. In fact, it's difficult to know which team between Netherlands and the Soviets are the better team right now. Obviously, we know who wins Euro '88 in the final, but these two teams do get to the final. So it's England it's tough, isn't it? It's a tough tournament. There are some good teams in this tournament, And England just going into it, as I mentioned, were one of the best in the world, but they come out of it bottom basically of all those 8. They go home with 0 points, and I mean, was they only scoring 2 goals as well. So it's a very, very, very disappointing. And another surprise really is that the FA do keep with Bobby Robson. They don't. There is another clamour that he's got to go, and it intensifies. But they stick with him, and going into the next tournament at least, his contract is going to be honoured till through to World Cup 90. And in a way, I guess we will find out in a couple of podcasts' time, what that was all about and what happened.
Yeah, this was the worst performance of the 3 at the Euros. It was just, no one wanted to be there, I don't think, and it was just a very, very lackluster performance and sorry end to the tournament. And
a sad end to 2 careers. I mean, Sampson and Hoddle. I mean, Hoddle was always, as I've mentioned, it's for such a quality player. I think he was always a bit marginalised by the managers that he played under for England. But it's a poor end for a career, especially Sampson. He had 86 caps and this was his last one. And what it's not a really great way to go out, is it?
Yeah. No, he was a great player, really consistent at the top level for a long time. Kenny Sansom, great England career. And Hoddle, I agree with you totally. And this is the last time obviously we're going to mention him on here because it's the end of his England career. But just England didn't make the best use of him. I don't think Ron Greenwood or Bobby Robson. I don't think Bobby Robson ever really trusted him to build a team around, and who knows how many caps he'd get if he was playing now. But just his whole style of play didn't seem to suit Robson, which is crazy as far as I'm concerned.
I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. I mean, I guess I didn't know how to play him. I guess I didn't know where to put him or what to do with him, or maybe he didn't fit into the systems that they envisaged for England. But he was always. And maybe he was just one of those infuriating players who because he could blow cold as well as hot. But boy, could he blow hot when he was on form. A dazzling player. But I think probably very infuriating that you couldn't get that consistency out of him. And I guess that's why he was, But then you're never going to get that consistency out of him if he's on the bench and he only comes on for the second half all the time. So you kind of. Maybe his inconsistency was made because the fact that he was not a regular starter.
Surprisingly, Tony Adams fell out of favor with Bobby Robson, and I think he only made his comeback with Graham Taylor, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Des Walker, I think, was the first after the Euros. I think Des Walker comes into prominence for that position.
That's right. Well, don't forget you've also got Butcher and you've got Mark Wright as well in there. So you've got quite a good depth at centre back. So Dave Watts has just retired, isn't it? Well, he's not retired, but he doesn't get picked again. But yeah, you've got quite a good depth there. So, but why he fell out of favour, I don't know, because Arsenal go on to win the league the following season. So why he's out of favour. For going into the next World Cup cycle, I don't know.
We have to also mention that this was at this point thought to be, I guess, the end of Mark Hateley as well, but he was surprisingly gained a cap in 1992. But otherwise, for all intents and purposes, this was the end of the road for Mark Hateley as well. And even though he was having a good season in France with Monaco, in fact, both Hoddle and Hateley would have a very good season in France with Arsene Wenger as manager, and they would win the league title in France. But as far as England, he was down the pecking order and was out of contention following the Euros altogether until that one cap in 1992.
Yeah, he'd been very much in favour during the mid part of the 80s, from 84 onwards. He was playing in or a lot of the big games. The '86 World Cup, obviously, he was. He played in 3 of those games in the '86 World Cup, but yeah, and he came on as a sub in all 3 of the games in Euro '88. But then, yeah, I guess he had better. Bobby Robson had better options. He was going with Beardsley and Lineker a lot of the time, who would stay fit for most of the next couple of years. So I guess he didn't. I mean, because he's not that old, really. When he has this, he's 26 when he has. He plays against the Soviets in this game. I mean, obviously he's 30 by the time he has his final cap. So it's odd that 4 years later he just gets a simple cap against the Czechs. Oh, by the way, it was Peru. Juan Seminario was the last person to score a hat-trick against England in May 1959 in Lima. 4-1 they won. Jimmy Greaves being the England scorer. Not a great day either.
The end of the road for a number of players in this season.
But not the end of the road for Bobby Robson, as we've mentioned. Despite it being an absolute disaster, I think the British press and maybe the British public thought that it was the end of the road, but the FA kept him on. They wanted to see his contract out.
And remember, Terry Venables had just midway through the season, he'd been, I guess, early in the season, he'd been sacked by Barcelona and joined Tottenham. So he had just joined Tottenham, not even a year. So maybe at that point, even if they wanted to, they probably couldn't get him.
Yeah, most probably. And of course, that's probably why they don't actually go. They actually go for Graham Taylor, who does have very good careers with it's Watford, isn't it? He's at this point.
At this point, he's at Aston Villa, isn't he?
Is he at Villa?
Taylor? Or maybe.
Yeah, I think he might join Villa this season. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So right. Okay. So yes, because he was at Lincoln originally, wasn't he? Yes, I remember. So probably Graham Taylor's not really on the radar, right? I think he's still very much Terry Venables. It's always like, Sam Allardyce was always on the radar, wasn't he? But then he didn't get the job. Then he didn't get the job. Then he did get the job. So it's very similar to what Venables had, who was always in contention, but then he didn't get the job. But then eventually it would happen. But a bit later, about '94, well, when they actually got rid of Taylor in '94, so Venables has to wait a little bit longer. But they stuck with their man, and going into the World Cup, they thought that we'll see his contract out. I think, and I remember reading Robson's autobiography. I think he offers to resign like after every match, and they always refuse it and say no. So it's quite funny. It starts to become an in-joke, really. Bobby Robson wanting to resign because he's had enough of all the. It's quite insidious, the press that he gets. It's really okay. Yes, you can be critical of an England manager, especially when they're not winning and they have a disastrous tournament. But some of the press was outrageous. Really, it was quite.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange because whenever these days anyone speaks about Bobby Robson, it's always in reverence. But people forget just what he went through with the press in those days.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, that's for. Yes, we've got a couple of more podcasts before we get to his pinnacle, I guess.
Yeah, but this was definitely, like we mentioned, his lowest point as an England manager.
And this is why I think this is a great starting with Bobby Robson's career, because Bobby Robson's managerial career matches, not only obviously because it's the time that I was alive and I remember these games, but his career was a roller coaster, and that's what I remember about England. They were going to one tournament looking like hopeless, and they do really, really well, and then they go into another tournament looking like world beaters, but then do appallingly, and then it comes back up again. It is, and that's what being an England fan is like. That roller coaster of going into tournaments, not knowing what's going to usually ends in failure. Well, apart from once, it always does end in failure. But Bobby Robson's career was like that as well. It was up, down, up, down, up, down, especially his England career. So I think if somebody were to say to me, think of an England manager, I think the first person I would think of would be Bobby Robson, I think, because he's always etched in my mind of being so similar to the team, in his fortunes, really.
Yeah. Paul, as a teenager that you were at the time, what was the vibe just after the Euros?
I think it was very, very negative because they'd done so badly from the expectations, and like I say, the press always overreact one way or another, and as we've been saying, he took some really terrible criticism, Bobby Robson, for this. I mean, there were probably some things he could have done differently, and the team was very reliant on Lineker, as we've seen. I think this was the tournament where he was diagnosed with hepatitis afterwards, and he wasn't at his best. He did seem a bit lethargic, but the team was so reliant on him, and that he just hadn't experimented enough, I don't think, in this season, in all those friendlies with other strikers. If Beardsley and Lineker were either off form or injured, there were really very few options for him. And I think it was just a bit of a reality check from the overreaction the other way that had made England one of the favourites, that was mainly based on one result in Yugoslavia.
Yeah,
this was so poor.
And another point, I'd like just a little, probably means nothing, but this is the only tournament that Brian Robson actually gets through unscathed. And
I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I mean, he plays in all three games and he's absolutely fine. He doesn't injure himself at all. So but what a great player he was. It just it's a shame that his best tournament was England's worst.
Yeah, it seems like with all these players, they never quite put it together. Hoddle, Robson, Barnes. Chris Waddle was a fantastic player. What he did later on with Marseille, he showed he was one of the best players in Europe. And I don't think, maybe apart from 1990, we never really saw the best of him either. I think if there was one criticism of Bobby Robson, he had those really gifted players, and then Beardsley and Lineker up front, and he never really found the best combination of them. I think he was very rigid with the 4-4-2. I don't think Barnes or Waddle needed to be restricted to just playing on the wing. They could have played in a free role. He could have tried Hoddle in a freer role as he did this season at Monaco, and just maybe tried some different attacking options and maybe a different formation. But he was very rigid on the 4-4-2 always. And I think maybe the other thing was his always picking the big central defenders, and they were very much the British style of players, all of them: Adams, Watson, Wright, Butcher, Watson. I think it was only after this that he picked Des Walker, who was already, I think, a pretty good first division player. And I think they were exposed a little bit in this tournament. I mean, Van Basten would probably have done that to anyone, but I think this was why Adams fell out of favour, although he was very young at the time as well, first major tournament. I think they were exposed a little bit with those big central defenders against teams who had a bit better movement and played in a slightly different way. I think those were the areas where he was a little bit rigid in his thinking, Bobby Robson. But
and that's a good point as well. I believe the English clubs are still banned from Europe at this point. So
yes, yeah.
The experience that English players, I mean, I think the first division has dropped. It's standing with other leagues in Europe. It definitely the standard had gone down, and the English first division was certainly nowhere near as good as the Italian league or the Spanish league or the German league at this point. So Paul's right. With those rigid centre backs, you played the English way, which worked very well in the first division. But when you're playing against continental opposition or people who played in different leagues, I mean, it clearly did not work, and there was no. He was very rigid with his formation, and not. It wasn't quite round pegs in square holes. Not quite like that, but he had more flair players than he thought, or at least those players, as we've mentioned, the Hoddles and your Beardsleys and your Barnes, they were restricted to a certain extent from playing their games that they played for their clubs. Liverpool, as we've been saying, Beardsley has been on fire for most of this season, and yet he can't seem to do it for England. Same with Barnes as well. Barnes was always one of those. Well, he started his career early on. I remember the '86 World Cup when Barnes came on. He changed the game, but then later on, when he was playing in other tournaments, I never seemed to bring that Liverpool form to England, and whether that was the way that he was being played, or the formation that he was in, or the role that he was being given, I guess we won't know. But it certainly was. You look at the players on paper and you think, well, this is a great team, but they weren't always. They blew hot and cold. They were roller coaster up and down.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was the frustrating thing, wasn't it? That it was obviously the case that he had really good players at his disposal. And the thing that didn't help with this tournament is that Jack Charlton had players, arguably a less gifted squad, and absolutely maximised their chances and made the most of the team that he had. And Bobby Robson, with more gifted players, didn't manage that in this tournament. So I think frustration would maybe be the overriding feeling after this, that they just hadn't achieved their potential.
I seem to remember being more disappointed than. Obviously, the press were really angry about the situation. I think a lot of the public probably were as well. But I remember just being disappointed that we're better than this. We shouldn't be going through a tournament and not even getting a point out of any of losing all three matches. England are better than this. There must be something must be wrong with this team or something. Something else must have happened. Kidding myself that it was just a flash in a pan sort of like thing. They just. But then isn't that the way with England? They tend to breeze through qualifications and then tournament proper, when they come up against somebody half decent, it can't cut the mustard. I mean, it's not a new thing, and it certainly since then it's always been the same, really. So I guess it's reverting to type, really.
The next objective was going to be the 1990 World Cup. And as you mentioned, the Federation decided to maintain Bobby Robson. In a way, they had to redeem themselves for the next World Cup in 1990. But that's another story. And we will discuss the 1988-89 season in depth, like we always do on our next podcast. Once again, Davey, I'd like to thank you for your participation in this series. And as always, feel free to leave questions and comments. For any questions and comments, you may contact me on my blog, on Twitter. I'm at SP1873, and my blog and my Facebook are Soccer Nostalgia. Mr. Paul Whittle can be contacted on Twitter at 1888 letter, and his blog is the 1888 letter. You may also follow the podcast on Spotify and now on Acast, on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and Stitcher, all under Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. Please leave a review, rate, and subscribe if you like the podcast. And Mr. Naylor can be contacted on Twitter at England Stats, and his website is englandstats.com. Again, all this information is listed on the blog and Spotify listings. Thank you once more, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks for having me again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Davey. I look forward to next time.